Hello, in this video I'm going to explain how to create character movement from scratch in a blank template in the Unreal Engine. So what I've done already is just create a project. This is a blank project from the games category. It's a blank template. There's no starter content. I have a couple materials I've created in here from a previous demo, but other than that is a blank file, so I don't have anything else in my scene here. Okay, so we're going to create character movement from scratch. So we're going to do a first-person character tutorial. We're going to start with the blank map and create everything from scratch instead of using any kind of templates. The first thing we're going to create is a game mode. So down here in the content folder, here's my level maps, first-person test level. If you haven't saved any maps yet, all you can do is save current as, or when the first time you save, it's going to ask you, and then you can save it as your individual map name. If not, it'll just save it as untitled, or will force you to save it as something as you save it the first time. So in this main area, I'm going to right click and I'm going to choose blueprint class, and here's our discussion here. We can create different kinds of blueprint classes, and Unreal uses visual scripting to be able to set all this up. And a blueprint class is basically an object that holds specific information. And our class that we're going to start with is a game mode. This game mode determines how the game should run and what to start the game out with. So there is a default game mode, but we're going to create our own. So if I right click in the content browser and choose blueprint class, I'm going to click on game mode base. Okay. So I'm going to title this one GM game mode, and we're going to say FPS for first person shooter, since we're going to do a first person shooter type game here. There's our game mode icon. We're going to open up the project settings to begin with, so that way when we open up our level, we're going to start with this game mode. So here's our project settings. If I go to the settings drop down, project settings, this is the project settings for the entire project. I'm going to go to maps and modes. And this is also where in the default maps you can change the default level to open this up with. So editor startup map, I'm going to say FPS test level. Okay, and I can also say game default map, FPS test level. That's the same level that I'm working on right now. So that way whenever I load Unreal this next time I open up the project, it'll load this file that I'm looking for, this level. The default game mode up here at the top, I'm going to change this to my GM_FPS. Okay. So next time and every time I load and when I start to hit play, it's going to play with my game mode FPS, and it's going to load my FPS test level as my starting point. Right, we don't need the project settings anymore. Actually, whoops, we do. We're going to use the action and axis mappings to set up so we can actually control our character. So we're going to go back into project settings, and I'm going to go to inputs. So this is underneath engine input. And as default with the blank map, there are no action or axis mappings. So we need to add our own, and we're just going to use the mouse and keyboard for this example. But you could also, after we do that, also set up the action and axis mappings for a controller, whether you're using a PlayStation, Xbox, whatever other kind of controller. We're going to start with axis mappings, which are used for player movement. So things like walking, running, move forward, move back, move left, move right. Those are going to be the axis mappings. Action mappings are used for things like shooting, jumping, punching, kicking, particular actions. So let's click the plus symbol besides axis mappings, and we'll get the arrow drop down, and here's my new action or axis mapping, and I'm going to title this one move forward. So underneath move forward, there's already an axis mapping associated with it. So I'm going to hit the arrow key, and I want to find the W key. So we're going to use the W key, WASD, to move the character. So let's type in W, and then under keyboard, we're going to type in W. There you go. So that's going to be a forward axis mapping. And I'm also going to add a negative, which would be the opposite. So instead of mapping a different axis for the S key, I can hit the plus symbol beside forward and then assign the S key here. So let's type in S and go find our keyboard S. and then I'm going to change the scale to -1, which basically means move the character backwards when the S key is pressed. Move the W key forward, move W key, and when the W key is pressed, move the character forward. When the S key is pressed, move the character backward. So I don't have to do a move forward and move backward. Just do a move forward and add the two there. I'm going to click on plus symbol beside axis mapping again, and then we'll say move right. Type it properly here. And we're going to do the A key. Find our keyboard and find the A key. And that's going to be, actually that's move left, so that will be -1. Right, move right, which would be the D key. So let's hit the plus symbol and do the D key. And that's going to be our move right command. D key, move right, that's positive. A key, move left. Okay, -1. All right, so that'll take into account our left to right motion. A, D moves left to right. W, S moves forward, backward. There's also two other ones which can be our mouse movement. So we want to be able to move or rotate our mouse around and be able to look around the scene. So axis mapping, let's change that. Do new axis mapping and do look X. And this is going to be a mouse controller, so let's do mouse X. So that would be look X, look left to right, X for horizontal. So if I'm going to move my mouse left to right, it moves the camera left to right. And then we also need another one, which is going to be look Y. And that's going to be vertical motion. So when the mouse moves up and down, the camera will move up and down. So let's do look Y, and we'll call this one mouse Y. There you go. Both of those scales are set to 1. We don't do inverse for this. It's basically because it's a motion that can go up and down. All right, so we need one action mapping. So we're going to go up and do plus action mapping. Open this up. And we're going to call this one jump. We can add other ones later. And then for the action, we're going to type in spacebar. So let's see. Let's just type in spacebar. So when spacebar is pressed, we want to add a jump action to this. So we have move forward, move right. It's not letting me change that. Move right. Here we go. Look X, look Y, and then jump. So that'll set us up so we can start creating the character blueprint here in a second. All right, we can close the project settings for now. We don't need that. All right, so we're ready to start creating the character stuff. So in the content folder, we're going to right click and choose new folder. And we're going to create a new folder called character. And anything dealing with our characters are going to go into this character folder. Now this is going to be a first person template or first person basis, so we're not going to create a lot of geometry for the character. So character folder, in that character folder, we're going to right click and choose blueprint class, and this time we're going to choose character. So this has all the base class settings for a character. We're going to retitle this one BP underscore character. Actually, let's call it BP underscore player. BP underscore player. All right, one thing before we really get too ahead of ourselves in creating the character stuff is I'm going to go back up to the content folder and double click on my game mode. So that way whenever I play my game mode, I can start by using this BP player character that I created. So this is the game mode, and these are all the basic settings to start the game. There is a default pawn class, and I want to change that from default pawn to BP player, the one we just created. So that way whenever I play the game, I'm going to be playing through the look of this BP player. Okay? So what that means is wherever this player start icon is where the game is going to spawn my BP player and all of my major character actions. So this is where my player is going to get started at. Alright, so now back in my character folder, I'm going to double click on my BP player. This is the blueprint for the players. This is a character blueprint. Character blueprints have a self, it has a capsule component, which is basically a stand-in holding place of what we're going to be adding our content to. There's the arrow component, which shows the forward direction that the character is going to be positioned to begin with. There's no mesh component, but there's a mesh node right now. And then we have a character movement. So that determines how the character moves. If I look over here in the details panel, there's things like, let's see, gravity, of course, max walk speed, jump velocity. So those are things we can change if we want the character to walk faster, jump higher, have more or less gravity associated with it. We're going to bypass this for a second and just set up our actions and our axes or axis events that we set up to begin with in the project settings. So we're going to go over to the event graph, and we have a couple of basic ones: event begin play, event actor begin overlap, event tick. We'll get into these when we talk more about interactions, but those are not used for player controller actions. We created those events. This is what the red one is. This is an event. We created events when we did our mappings. So that move forward, move right, those are events. So what we're going to do is simply recall those events in our event graph for the player character. If I right click, I'm going to choose move forward, or type in move forward. So if I right click in a blueprint, these are all the different actions that I can add as a visual scripting node within this character blueprint. So I want to go look for a move forward. And we're going to use our axis event, not the value. We're going to do axis event move forward, and this pulls up that action that we created. And then we're also going to right click under that, and we're going to say move right. There you go, we'll call it move right. Okay. So this is going to be for our move forward, and this is going to be for our move right. Okay. All right, we'll continue adding to it later. In our move forward, we have an execute and an access value. We're going to need to use both of them. If I drag off of execute over here, and it brings me a wire. So if I drag off for execute, it creates a wire. And I'm going to create an add movement input. If you spell it out, it'll come up. Add movement input. Here you go. I'm going to pull this up here. And a good way to kind of organize things is to have your executables create straight lines and then create curved or diagonal lines from your other axes as well. My axis value goes into the scale. If you note, if you look at the outputs and inputs, it'll only let you drag this executable to another input which aligns with it. It'll only let you drag axis value to the scale value, right? So these are float values, so this will allow us to connect things up to the right connections here. So axis value goes to scale value. We need to tell it what world direction to adjust. So I'm going to click under the move forward, I'm going to right click, and I'm going to choose get actor forward vector. So a forward vector is a forward line that it creates from a particular point in 3D space that it can then track. So this basically determines the actor's forward position on every frame. So it's a vector that it's creating out perpendicularly from the player character in a forward direction that I can then determine the direction of my character, which will then drive how the character moves. So this get actor forward vector, the return value gets dragged into the world direction. All right, that's it for that one. For the move right, we're going to do a similar action here. We're going to do drag out from executable, add movement input. Here we go. Move that up. Axis value goes to scale value. And then instead of get forward vector, we need to get actor right vector. So this get actor right vector is a vector from the right side of the character, which determines the right axis of the character, the right direction of the character. I'm going to drag that return value into world direction. All right, and that should be it. So whenever we're creating blueprints, we are creating code. It's just a visual version of that. So we do need to compile, and we're going to save. Compile, make sure there's no errors. The results log tells us that, successful. We can also comment out our entire section to organize this a little more. So I'm going to drag select over all these nodes that I just created and hit C for comment, C. And that creates a box, and this is like a scripting comment. We're going to call this one movement. There we go. So that just organizes everything, so I know this block of code, and I can click on that comment section and drag that around. This whole block of code is for my movement. So let's compile again. Let's minimize our playable character blueprint, and let's go hit play. So I had some basic objects in here that I created for a previous material demo, but if I click in here, now I should be able to move left or right. I should be able to move forward and backward. So my movement works. Okay, so you can see those materials in there. I can hit escape. I have these turned off, so there's my materials that I created, some basic cubes. My play space is a little small, so let's take our cube and let's scale that up a lot more. So let's do 5 by 5 by 5. There we go. We will quickly rebuild the lighting. The lighting needs to be rebuilt there. And we can replay test, right? So, but that showed that this works with those forward and right movement that we've already created. So let's let that finish. Let's go play. So I have left, right, forward, and back motion. One thing I don't have is the ability to move my mouse around or jump, so that's what we're going to create next. So let's escape out. But our forward and right movement work. And I was using WASD to move around. So let's open back up our blueprint, and beside our movement, we're going to create our mouse movements. So we're going to right click and we're going to look for Look X. And this was our Look X axis event that we created. I'll zoom in a little. Then I'm going to right click again and choose Look Y. Axis event Look Y. There you go. So it's red, so it's an event. And we don't have to do as much with the look. We do need to connect it to the mouse command of what the camera is going to do. Okay, so this is actually going to be looking for the camera rotation. If I drag out from the executable of LookX, I'm going to click and we're going to choose yaw. So the LookX is going to be connected to the add controller yaw input. So yaw is horizontal rotate from side to side for the camera, and that's going to be LookX, which is the horizontal motion of the camera. We're going to need to connect up our axis value to the value here, and that should be it. That should be all the things we need right there. For the Look Y, we're going to need to do the same thing, but instead of yaw, we're going to drag out and we're going to type pitch. So we're going to do add controller pitch. So pitch is the up and down vertical motion that a camera can rotate in. And instead of doing an axis value to value, let's go ahead and do that. And I'll show you axis value to value, and we will compile. This is actually going to be inverted, so if you like inverted FPSs, then this will be right. Let's minimize this and hit play. So now if I click in here and I move around with WASD, that works. But if I move my mouse, I can rotate my mouse around as well. Now it's just inverted, so if I push my mouse forward away from me, it looks down. If I pull my mouse closer to me, it looks up. If you like that, then you can keep that. But if you wanted to create kind of the inverted look, let's go back into our player blueprint. And instead of directly connecting our axis value, we just need to multiply this by -1. If you hold down Alt while clicking on a wire that's connected, it disconnects that. If you have it connected and want to connect it to something else, you can hold down Control and move that around to something else that it could be connected to, like this one for some reason. We don't want to do that one, so we're going to connect back up the top one. So Alt disconnects, Control reconnects it to something else. What we want to do instead, let's move this over a little bit, is drag out from axis value, and I'm going to type in the multiply symbol, the asterisk, and we need to get a float times float, because the green wire means a float, so float times float, that means an X, and we need to multiply this axis value by -1. That will invert that rotate of the camera. So now we can connect up our multiply back to the value. Let's comment this out since we're here. Let's comment, drag select, and select C, and we'll say mouse movement, and let's compile and save. So now if we go back and play, I can still use WASD to move around. If I roll the mouse further away from me, it looks up. Roll it down, it looks down, and that's more natural kind of first-person shooter point of view. If you like inverted, then just don't do that last multiply command. All right, let's back out. So we got our major motion. The only thing we don't have is jump. So even if I tried to press spacebar while playing, it's not going to jump. So the last thing we need to do is just add our jump event. So in our blueprint, in the event class, let's just move over here even further, and we're going to add our jump event. So let's right click, we'll type in jump, and I'm going to look at action event. So under input, action event, here's my jump event that I created earlier. And Unreal has a nifty little function that's already set up for jump. So if I click and drag out from pressed, I'm going to type in jump, and there is a jump function. There's a blue little F for function on there. And that's all I have to do for pressed is attach it to a jump function. But I also want to, when the jump button, the spacebar is released, I want it to stop jumping. So I'm going to click and drag out from the released executable, drag out down here, and type in stop jumping. That's a different function to stop the character from jumping in the air. Here we go. So that's all I need to do. I'm going to drag select that and hit C for comment, and we'll say jump. There we go. So with each one of these that I've created so far, I can just drag select the comment, and that moves all those commands. So I have movement. That encompasses my move forward and move right. I have look X and look Y, which is my mouse movement. And then I have my jump movement. All right, let's compile and save. Here we go. All right, so let's get out of this and let's go play. So now if I click in my scene, I can move around with WASD. I can look around in all my different angles with my mouse. And then I can also hit spacebar to jump. And spacebar is going to work when I'm moving, when I'm looking around, and even when I'm staying stationary. So those are our major actions for player movement with the character. One last thing I want to do is add a camera to this. The basic character will spawn a camera in here, but we don't have a lot of adjustments that can easily be made to the camera. So we're going to create a new camera. So if I go to the viewport, I was in the event graph of my player blueprint. If I go to the viewport, in the components up here, I want to add a camera. So let's do add, and we'll type in camera, and this is a basic camera. There you go. We can title it something different. I'm just going to leave it called camera. It's going to put the camera in the center of that capsule. So I'm just going to move this up maybe 100 units from the original position. Maybe we'll try 150. We'll try 150 for now. See how that height looks. And we don't have to do much else except for there's a command called use pawn control rotation. If we don't click this, it's not going to rotate the camera with our commands, with the mouse commands that we've already created. So before I do anything else, I'm going to click in the details panel of the camera and make sure I check box use pawn control rotation. Check that. Let's compile and save. And let's go test that height out and see how that looks. So let's hit play. There we go. So my character is definitely higher than what it was earlier. Boxes are much lower, but everything else should still work. Okay, if I move the mouse around, if I do WSD or hit the spacebar, everything should still work. So maybe my character's too big or sitting up too tall. So maybe I will go back into the blueprint. Let's go to the camera and let's lower that back down to 100 for right now. We may increase that later. There we go. Compile, save, and let's go play again. Here we go. So it's still a little higher than what it was, but I think that looks a little bit better for the jump height. That's the one thing we always want to adjust it according to. And how fast the player's moving and how fast I can look around. One last thing I wanted to mention here, we've created everything how we want to, but in the viewport or anywhere, if you click on character movement, you can look at all the attributes for the character movement. These are all the default settings. So like I said earlier, we have gravity underneath character movement. If you want to make it look like they're jumping on the moon, we can increase or decrease the gravity. We can increase or decrease things like maximum acceleration, step height. We have walkable floor. Here's our maximum walk speed. So that's how fast we're walking. If you want to make the character walk faster, we would increase that. If you want to make the character walk slower, we would decrease that. We could also change how high the character is jumping. If we want the character to jump higher, we can increase this jump Z velocity. If we want the character to jump lower, decrease that. We have air control that we can allow the character to adjust the character's motion as they're falling in the air. Here's where we would change all of that in the character movement of the character blueprint. That's what the character blueprint adds, is the character movement beyond just a blueprint of an object. So to wrap it up for this video, being able to create some basic character movement with WASD, moving the mouse around to look around, hitting spacebar to jump, and we've actually created a camera that allows us to have more fine-tuned adjustments of what the camera can do as well.